Hi, my name is Sasan Kasravi. You're watching Proteus Debate Academy, where we make free, high-quality resources for debaters and for debate coaches. It's been a little while since I made one of these. Part of the reason for that is because they take a tremendous amount of work. I'm like a couple hours into this. My last take was like a half hour long, and then I was like, I'm just going to start over. But another part of it is the irony that, me, Tanya, Paul, we're all debate coaches. So at the time of year when you have the most desire to watch debate videos, we are the most busy with work. With that having been said, my circumstances have changed around a little bit that I think are going to allow me to pour a lot more time and effort into this channel. Obviously, everything's staying free, but hopefully there's a lot of really cool stuff coming around the bend for all of you. But let's talk about what this video is about. Oh, real quick, some of you came up to me. I was just at TOC couple days ago, and some people came up and said hello, and I thought that was really cool. And I'm going to be at NCFL in Chicago Memorial Day weekend, so if you see me there, please don't hesitate to say hello. I'd love to say hi back. Okay, so let's talk about public forum topics and the feedback that we are giving them for next year. So there was a post on Reddit asking for feedback. Now it's asking for feedback by May 1st. I'm recording this at around 1 o'clock on April 30th, and 30 days half May. So April. So by the time you're watching this, there might not be a lot of time for you to submit feedback. But I think that's also probably for the best, right? I don't want to like make a video that's like, this is what people should think about this, and then have people just submit what I said. So hopefully you've already submitted feedback on this. Being on the topic writing committee for public forum or for any other debate event is a truly thankless job, because it is the first place that people will go to blame a lot of problems in forensics on. And there's a lot of competing interests where it's basically impossible to make everybody happy. And then you get a lot of like people like, I don't know, shit talking the resolution. And I think practices like this are great, and people not engaging in it makes any dissatisfaction they have with the topics. I don't know. I'm not going to say they're to blame, because I don't know what's going to happen with this feedback, right? I don't know if I'm going to hand them absolute gold and they're going to do nothing with it. But I love that they're asking for this sort of engagement. So I've gotten this far. I've gotten 2 topics in. We're several hours in. This video, God help us, might be like 6 hours long. I do have a picnic that I'm invited to later, so I'm hoping to leave within 2 hours to go to a picnic. We'll see how that goes. Before we get into the specifics of the topic, there's 3 aspects to a topic, like a resolution, that I want to talk about. The first aspect is whether, like, what we call trichotomy, like whether it's a fact resolution, a value resolution, a policy resolution. The second is the topic area and like what people are going to be talking about. And then the third is ground in the debate, right? Like what the specific phrasing of the resolution allows each side of the debate to advocate for or argue. Let's start with the first one, right? So the first thing I have to say about fact and value is that the difference between them is really, really vague and really poorly defined. I've personally done my best to distinguish between the two in a consistent and intuitive way that I argue should be the way everybody looks at it. And it should be how these things are just defined. With that having been said, people aren't using that definition to make stuff like this, right? And what matters in a lot of debate rounds is like whether the model you're advocating for was accessible and predictable and all of that stuff. So I'm not going to talk about that. So for the sake of this, let's just combine fact and value into one thing, right? And we'll just contrast that with policy. A policy resolution, which is different than like policy debate. I mean, they're named after each other, right? But a policy resolution is a resolution where there is an actor and an action. And there are certain implications of that, right? But an actor would be like the United States federal government, and an action should be, let's say, making rent control universal. And a policy resolution would say the United States federal government should make rent control universal. What that does, right, is it creates two things for us to think about. The rent control policy, universal rent control, the good things that would happen as a result of that, the bad things that would happen as a result of that. But we're also evaluating the status quo. And in the status quo, there is good things about the way things are right now and bad things about the way things are right now. And so it's evaluating this here, and then comparing them to each other. So what that means, for instance, is if you're the affirmative and the status quo is really, really bad, you don't actually have to prove very much about why your policy would do very good things, right? Imagine you're on like the third story of a burning building and someone's saying like, you got to jump out the window. Now, the chances of success jumping out of a window may be pretty low, let's say 20%, right? But the guarantee of like burning in the building by not jumping makes that 20% worth it. We call this strategy and debate try or die. And strategically, it makes it so that a lot of rounds become about stuff like extinction and, I don't know, nuclear war and whatever like that, right? Like if you're arguing like nuclear war is so bad that even if there is a 1% chance of like saving us from it, then we should take that. Now, I don't necessarily agree with how that's done. I mean, I don't agree with how those strategies are implemented. I don't think that fully indicts like comparisons to the status quo and significant arguments or whatever. But like, I think that first of all is why at least the two resolutions I've looked at so far use a value framing. I think their thinking is by not making this a policy, we have fewer things to research. We're making the research load lower. You have fewer instances of like people like bringing up some random thing that we don't know about as an alternative. And you also make it so that you can't argue like the status quo is really bad and the world's going to explode and there's some remote chance that doing this saves it and that wins you the debate. Yeah, I think the other kind of layer of it is that, again, my assumption with what I've seen people talking about in public forum is that critiques are becoming more popular. And that is a major concern for a lot of people. Just going off of like what people say in the subreddit and stuff like that. I don't keep up with like who's reading what in public forum and what's succeeding and like whoever won the TOC, like what did they read? Did they read critiques and stuff like that? So I don't know how prevalent the issue actually is. What I do know is that there is an increasing sentiment against critiques in public forum compared to like when we started this debate channel 6 years ago, right? And I think the way you kind of look at that is that there used to be almost no one in public forum that could confidently read critiques. There used to be almost no judges in public forum who were willing to listen to critiques and knew how to evaluate them even if they did. But now, so what a lot of like public forum people are saying is like policy is a space where like you should go if you want to do critiques, right? And indeed in policy, there's more people who know how to read critiques. There's more people who know how to engage with critiques as a competitor, and there's more people who know how to evaluate critiques as a judge, right? Assuming critiques have become something that is unfair in public forum, what that would mean to me is that it's reached a point where some people can read critiques in public forum, and enough judges exist that are willing to vote for them and ostensibly know how to evaluate them, but there's still a significant number of people who don't know how to engage with those arguments. And because they don't know how to engage with those arguments, they're losing those rounds. And so there's this scenario where people are saying, like, you shouldn't be reading critiques. On the other side is saying you should learn how to engage with critiques. So what that has to do with topics is I personally assume that part of the incentive to move from policy framing to value framing is to try to make it so that it's harder to read critiques. I guess if you're watching this, there's a good chance you're not that familiar with critiques. The short version of it is that critiques indict something about what your opponent has advocated for, which may or may not be what the resolution is asking, right? So, like, let's say rent control policies is the topic, right? And it's like we should make universal rent control. The negation could say that you are, I don't know, advocating. You're like, they could be saying that, I guess, I don't know how rent control is capitalist. Kind of seems the opposite, but whatever, right? By trying to work within a system by arguing that capitalism can be amended and resolve its problems, you're upholding capitalism. And inherently, the cause of the problem we're talking about is capitalism itself. And the problem will never be solved as long as capitalism exists. And also, by endorsing a model that doesn't reject capitalism, you are perpetuating cycles of, like, violence, right? That is what a critique could say. What I imagine is happening here is now the affirmative isn't advocating for anything. They're not saying, I think rent control is good, or that, like, I think we should have rent control. I think we should have more rent control. I think rent control would fix this problem. All it's saying is the current policies are doing more good than harm. And I think that gets people out of certain links to critiques in theory. I think the issue there is, in practice, like, anyone reading a critique can find some sort of like that's not the hard part. The hard part of reading critiques is not finding something that gives you a link, right? So I think that's really not helping that much. I think the other aspect of it is when the problem itself is that the other team doesn't know how to argue against critiques, you're not solving that, right? You're still requiring new debaters who don't know what a critique is to understand their opponent's arguments well enough and understand the theory that I'm explaining right now well enough to be able to come up and potentially explain it in a round, right? And so the burden is still on the competitors, which I think is just, like, not going to fix the issue. I think these issues, if they're going to be addressed, should be addressed in the actual rules themselves. With that having been said, let's get into the topic area. I think the topic area is good. I think rent control is a good issue. I guess broadly speaking, I guess before going into this rent control bit, right? My concern with topic areas is, like, just how difficult it is to convince a kid to care about this topic. I've taught a lot of kids in low-income communities who just, like, could not care less about some of the topics that are brought up. And, like, yes, it is beneficial for them to learn these things, just like it's beneficial for people to, I don't know karate and CPR, but it's not like by making the topic of the debate this, it signals to some students, depending on the topic, that like we're not here to discuss you. Like we're not here to discuss issues that matter to you. And it's not just a high income, low income thing, right? Like I taught a lot of really rich kids in Silicon Valley, and they were in middle school, and just the way their eyes glazed over as I tried my absolute best to explain what capital gains tax is and try to get them to want to form an opinion. Like you can force a child to make an argument about capital gains tax. It's really hard to make them want to have a more informed opinion on capital gains tax, right? So I think just for topic areas, like I am just looking for something that has some sort of like political and cultural significance, and then like actually matters somewhat to people. And then finally, there's like the division of ground, right? So the division of ground has a lot to do with the exact phrasing of the resolution, right? And like if you take a look at this resolution here, for example, when it says the benefits of rent control policies outweigh the harms, well, what that means is that you can't like talk about any alternative to rent control. So what do I mean by that? Let's say the debate was, let's say we were talking, let's say you had $100 and we were trying to invest that somewhere, right? And let's say you could invest that in like a mug company, and the mug company is guaranteed to give you a 10% return on your investment every single year. That's good. Your wealth will keep building. You're outpacing inflation. Fingers crossed. And that is generally considered like to be doing more good than harm, right? You're not losing value. But what if there was another thing that you could, I don't know, like electronics, right? There's an electronics company that is guaranteed to give you a 10 times return on your investment every year. In that case, we could say investing in the mug company has more benefits than it has harms, but it is not desirable. It is not the most desirable option because there's something else we could do instead that gives us a way better return, right? So what this rent control topic, for instance, is leaving on the table is like, what are the alternatives to rent control, and are they good or bad, right? I don't know if the affirmative gets to argue that. Like, does the affirmative get to say rent control may be bad, but it is better than all the alternatives? I would argue, based on a strict reading of this resolution, no, you don't get to argue that, because the resolution is going out of its way not to let you do that, because it's not saying the United States should have rent control. It's not a question of should. It's, is rent control doing good or doing harm at a greater level? You could say it's doing 3% more harm than good, but all the other alternatives do 98% more harm than good. That would still make the resolution more harm than good, make a strict reading of the resolution go neg. So I guess now going into like what I think about this topic, you might have already read it by now. I don't know. I don't think that leaving alternatives out of the discussion is necessarily good, right? I think having a comparison to alternatives is probably helpful, and I think there's a way of doing that without making it a policy framing where we're saying we should do this over some other alternatives. The other thing, in terms of the division of ground here, is that the subject of the sentence, like rent control policies, is really vague, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, what rent control policies? Like, rent control policies are normally city by city, right? And so, like, the rent control policies of Denver and of what was the other example I used here? Oakland aren't the same rent control policies. So what happens in the debate if one city has good rent control policies and the other side has bad rent control policies? What would that mean about whether the benefits are outweighing the harms in the United States? Is it just the city with the highest population that makes the difference, right? I think that's really messy. So what I've suggested here is, okay, keep the value framing, add alternatives. So I said it might be viable to make it the best viable solution to the housing crisis in the United States requires rent control policies. You're not arguing for a policy being enacted. You're just saying that rent control is necessary in order to get us out of the housing crisis. Maybe that's even a better way of saying it. Rent control is a necessary tool for addressing the housing crisis in the United States. So what that does is it still evaluates rent control, but it allows you to look at past precedents. It allows you to have conjecture about stuff that might happen in the future. It allows you to compare rent control with alternatives. But what it doesn't allow you to do is say the status quo is bad and so we have to try something, right? It's just a question of whether rent control is necessary for the solution or not. So I think that's a little bit better. All in all, I like the topic area. I don't like the way ground is divided and that it's messy. I think the value framing stuff, I'm not going to choose a horse on the race. I think the best version of this topic is an 8 or a 9. I think the current version of this topic, I think, is a 6. I mean, I think most people aren't going to have these sorts of issues, but I think at higher levels, it will be. I'm going to be honest, I'm giving this a 6 because I imagine there's a lot of room to go down. Let's take a look here. In the United States, the benefits of zoning laws outweigh the harms. Now, most of my phrasing, most of my feedback for this applies here, which is what I wrote there. The big difference is just the topic area. I mean, it's almost exactly the same resolution, but with a different topic area. My concern is that this is really boring. I think it's really boring to take a new student and be like, hey, kid, have you ever noticed that you can't have a pizza shop next to an apartment building? Oh, you haven't noticed that because you live in a city that allows that? Okay, well, imagine, let me tell you about Walnut Creek, California, where you can't have that. And yet there's residential zones and there's commercial zones. And there the two shall meet, right? I think it's really boring. I think it's really boring. So same thing. I'm going to give it a 4. I wrote here, my feedback here's basically the same as above. Sorry if you've stored it in a way that makes it difficult to read. The short version is that I think it's problematic that there's thousands of different zoning laws in the United States getting lumped together. But yeah, I mean, I guess zoning laws I'm also confused about what the negation is defending. Not having zone. Oh, I guess they're just saying the zoning laws do harm. Yeah, like that's the thing. You're not defending a world without zoning laws. You're just saying the way the zoning laws are right now are good, or the way the zoning laws are right now are bad. Um, um, as a coach, I'm also concerned that the various zoning laws of different parts of the US would be a really boring topic to teach students and decrease investment. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at 3. The United States federal government should. See, this is a policy resolution because we have an actor and they are the subject of the sentence, right? And that's kind of what links into like critiques and whatever, because you are advocating on behalf of that actor. And then there's an action: substantially increase regulations on sports betting. Okay. Slash resolved typo there. The United States federal government should substantially limit sports betting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, first things first, this is a policy resolution. They probably mean for this to happen a little bit later in the debate season when people have figured out how debate works. Maybe they want to use the value framing earlier on. I don't have a problem with that. Topic area: sports betting. I think the topic area of sports betting is fine. I think it's an issue that doesn't really interact with most students' lives. I'm guessing this is pitched in order to diversify the kinds of issues we talk about in debate and to avoid topics always going to nuclear war. I just worry that it's not the best approach, right? Like a debate with very small impacts either way is hard to evaluate and might make judge decisions feel more arbitrary. So yeah, as far as the topic area, that's kind of my concern. As far as the actual phrasing goes, what? Like, is there a single standard for, like, is sports betting federal law? Okay, so sports betting is regulated on a state by state basis. So the AF is arguing what 50 different agents should do. Like, you know what I mean? Right? Like, the federal government, like, 2018 SCOTUS said, am I reading this right? Repealed ban on sports betting. So I haven't read the case or anything, but I just want to be sure that there is actual AF ground on the federal government even being allowed to do the AF. What are some other concerns that I have there? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a low impact debate, right? Um, Generally speaking, strong debate arguments link to one of five impacts. Those are economic collapse, public health, poverty, which is different than economic collapse, war, and the environment. This isn't like just debate ease. This is rooted, or at least reflected, also in something called the Obama Doctrine. So Barack Obama's national security strategy argued that things like the environment and things like healthcare and things like the economy are all a part of national security, because a collapse of any one of these makes all the rest of the dominoes fall, right? So the idea that these large impacts are interconnected and are like the five main pillars of like the regular human experience in the United States is pretty well substantiated. And the other thing is that there's other impacts also, like, for example, education, how well educated people are. But generally speaking, the way you terminalize an impact like education is by relating it to one of these five issues of how education can create technologies that improve health outcomes or resolve environmental issues or lift people out of poverty or boost the economy, right? Like, I think pretty much all arguments in debate that have strong impacts relate in some way to those five. I haven't come up with a catchy name for them yet, but those five impacts, right? The five big impacts. So, when we're talking about sports gambling, like, what are we talking about here? Like, poverty and like the economy? Yeah, I think it's a pretty narrow scope, right? Like, I think a debate topic that leaves the AF to talk about how gambling affects poverty, and the neg to talk about how tax revenue improves the economy leaves very little variety in the rounds. Maybe there's some other significant issue that you all see this linking into that I'm missing, but I'm not seeing a lot of connections to other facets of life, such as, say, the environment or public health. Forget all that. I'll just leave it here. Cool. So what do I think of this? I think it is fine. I think it's boring. I think we'll go with the 5. We'll go with the 5. Resolved. The United States companies should comply with all lawful orders to access encrypted documents. What? So it's a value. It's a policy framing, right? We have companies and we have what they should do, but it's all companies and with all orders, right? Like, I get what this is, right? This is like, the Trump administration is trying to access Social Security stuff, and that has everybody like upset. And they're also, I don't know, probably trying to ask for other. I mean, they're trying to be like TikTok. What is your thing, right? Give us your data or whatever else, right? But it's just a debate about whether companies are more trustworthy than the government. I guess I like that debate, right? Like, I like the inherent clash you're setting up here about whether companies or the private sector are more trustworthy than the government or the public sector. I think there's probably a cool resolution here somewhere. But with that said, I think all companies should comply with all lawful orders, especially when the government itself declares which orders are lawful in a pretty arbitrary and usually unchecked way, like one of my executive orders. I think this just makes it so the AF has to defend way too much, and all the neg has to do is nitpick and cherry pick and find their favorite 2 or 3 instances that no one has ever heard of that would make it so that would be an instance of harm stemming from compliance with orders. But I kind of dig the whole, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna give that a 5. I don't think I could do better with the current framing here, but I like the inherent clash that they're trying to set up here, right? With stuff like ICE and whatever, right? Like, I think it's like setting up a great and important question about, like, do people have a responsibility to reject harmful but legal orders, right? I think the phrasing here is tricky in public forum because it could very easily become just a novice LD resolution, right? So I don't know how I would rephrase this, but I think that clash is cool and interesting. I think this phrasing is not, doesn't give even grounds, right? So as far as the type of topic it is, fine with that. Topic area, love it. The actual execution of the division of grounds, don't love it. Resolved, resolved states governments in the United States should end all judicial elections. I see. Okay. So, again, policy round, don't mind that. Um, topic area. Um, okay, the division of grounds or whatever. I think that's fine here. I think that's fine. I'm not really running into any issues with like how this is phrased and ways that gives inherent advantages to one side or the other that makes the debate an unfair. It's mostly a question of the topic area. Um, I think in defense of this topic, we talk a lot about the executive branch of government in debate. We talk a lot about the legislative branch of government in debate. We talk about the judicial branch sometimes, but even then, it's mostly the Supreme Court. And most people don't know anything about, I mean, myself included, don't really know very much about the judicial branch and like how state and city judges or whatever state judges are appointed. So I think the argument is, I think the argument can be made that it is important and valuable for people to learn about this. I just think here I'll type it as I say it, right? I think everything is fine with this topic, other than I don't think it's the strongest. Fine with this topic in terms of phrasing and grounds, or let's say, yeah, phrasing is fine. I just don't think that it's the strongest topic area. The two reasons are, one, I think it's boring, but also, two, I think it's really hard to argue impacts on a topic like this, because the only inherent impacts coming from the actual direct action is like people having to show up on an election day or something. But as far as what the actual outcome of this decision would be goes, that's bad phrasing. It depends so much on factors not talked about in the resolution. For instance, state by state, it would make a huge difference based on who the governor is, right? Who appoints governor? Great. So it might have awesome policy results in, I don't know, I'm going to say Washington, but terrible ones in, again, I'm going to pick a random state, Nebraska. That asks us to know things and predict things about a lot of states that gets pretty granular before we can actually reach any specific impact. Maybe the way around that is to argue in favor of or against a policy in a vacuum, rather than based on the consequences that stem from that policy. But I think that non-consequentialist model, am I spelling that right? model is better suited for an event like LD. Okay. How do I feel about this? 6, I guess. Okay. The U.S. should implement universal compulsory voting for all citizens. 5. I think this topic works great on a yeah, 6. 7? No. I think this topic works great on a in terms of its phrasing and division of I guess division of grounds isn't even I think this topic works great in terms of its phrasing. I worry that the impacts are unpredictable unless we try to argue who would win elections as a result of, let's say, the consequentialists. The consequentialist impacts are unpredictable unless we try to argue who wins as a result of this new model. Just comparing a model's goodness to another model's goodness, I don't think will hold up too well if someone argues that X model creates Y policies. With that said, I like that there's, countries that already have this that we can look to and compare to the U.S. I actually don't really. Now, yeah, I think a 5 on that one. Okay. Resolved. State governments in the United States should require independent commissions to draw their congressional districts. What's the neg ground on this? What's the neg ground on this? It's something everyone agrees on, but doesn't happen because what percentage of Americans want to end gerrymandering? %63% of Americans agree. Most Americans want, something majority of Americans agree on. I think a debate about a specific way to implement this could potentially be interesting, but if the topic is just, is gerrymandering bad, then I think, there isn't. Sorry, that should be gerrymandering is bad. And I think there isn't very much for the neg side to say in this debate. Okay. In the United States, the benefits of collective bargaining rights outweighs the harms. Okay. I'm fine with that. There's got to be some economic measure. Yeah, I mean, there's got to be one person saying labor unions hurt the economy, right? Uh, yeah, I'm concerned about neg ground here, but not nearly as much as with the. What was the other topic? Gerrymandering topic. I think ultimately it's just gonna be hard to herd. It's gonna be hard to find research that says a lack of collective bargaining power does good stuff of some kind. Um, let's see. Labor unions drive up costs. 2003 employment policy found that the company with 10% of its workforce in the union could see costs. Okay. Okay. Um. Okay. All right. Sure. Um. Okay. In a cursory glance, I found some stuff saying labor unions increase the costs to businesses and wages and other stuff like that, and wages and resources and other stuff. And it can probably be argued that those costs get passed on to consumers. I just don't know how viable that argument is going to be for a fair debate. 6. Okay. The Supreme Court should overturn District of Columbia v. Heller. Okay. What is District of Columbia v. Heller? Gun ownership. Okay. So, gun control. It should be more difficult to have guns. Oh, third, the Second Amendment of the United States does not protect. Okay. Yeah, right. So here's the thing. I don't think there's a great model here for arguing, like, the consequences of the action, right? So it's a policy debate. It has an actor and it has an action, but again, you're not taking like a consequentialist evaluation of the resolution, which is, in my opinion, what public forum is built around, right? Whereas something like Lincoln Douglas would be a little bit more like, let's evaluate this thing as philosophically valid or invalid, or true or untrue, or valuable or not valuable, right? Even with that aside, right, like, the arguments here aren't about what would happen if this policy were passed. I think that third resolution phrases it the most succinctly, right? It's about what the Constitution does or does not say. It's not even about like what is moral or is not moral, what is valuable or is not valuable, because that's not what the Supreme Court does. What they do is they interpret what the Constitution does or does not say. Well, obviously with some leeway and whatever and some motive behind it. But generally speaking, like, my concern with this resolution is that it doesn't ask students to evaluate what the consequences of increasing gun control or decreasing access to guns would be. It doesn't even ask students to examine the morality behind these decisions. It's more of just interpreting the text of the Constitution and examining case law for precedents. I mean, does precedents even matter for the Supreme Court? Like, what would these arguments be, right? Because if you're saying the Second Amendment does not do this, right? If the question is what the Second Amendment does or does not say, my worry is that the best version of this clash here looks like really arcane and difficult to really arcane examinations of law, which I don't personally think suits the PF format very well. Otherwise, I think most debates are going to be one side saying, I don't understand how this would work. Like, the only people we can look to for what the interpretation of the Second Amendment ought to be is the Supreme Court. And they interpreted it. Like, what are we going to look to otherwise? Like, what are we going to look like? What one side should have, or like what the dissenting, like, we'll just read the arguments of the dissenting justices. Like, even then, I think it just becomes one side reading the decisions of the judges who ruled in favor, and the other side reading the decisions of the judges who dissented. I don't think this examines what gun policy should be. And for that reason, I give it a 3. Can I go up to a 4? Yeah, I guess 3 feels mean. I'll go up to a 4. Topic 10, resolved. The United States should abolish the president's ability to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. Kind of already did that topic. Was that LD? NSDA topics. What's the term I'm looking for? AUMFs. Authorization for use of military force. What? That's not it. Public forum. Is there past topics at the bottom? Potential past topics. Public forum debate. Authorization. March 2018. On balance, the current authorization for use of military force gives too much power to the president. I mean, I guess that was have been 8 years before, so I guess not anyone competing has debated this topic. I think AUMF is interesting. I think this current topic is phrased a lot better than this one was. This is one of my least favorite phrased topics in my time coaching public forum. All right, let's take a look. The United States should abolish the president's ability to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. The issue here, not with the phrasing exactly, but like what this topic implies is a constitutional amendment. I brought up authorization for use of military force earlier, but the authorization for use for military force is where Congress tells the president, you have the power to do things, which one gives the president approval. It's no longer without congressional approval, but that isn't a source of power for the United States. So, for example, if you look, first of all, in every like acceptance of an AUMF, every president has ever said, "I appreciate your approval, but that's not where the source of this power comes from." And Congress says, "Yes, we acknowledge that you do not have the power to do this. We acknowledge that you already have the power to do this, and you do not need our permission to do it. We're just giving you our permission." The only implication of an AUMF is that Justice Jackson said that anytime that Congress approves of a military action that the president is taking, it's inappropriate for courts to intervene because two bodies of government have already approved of it. But anyway, this is talking about like when Congress doesn't approve. So if you go to the Congressional Research Service and you go list of military actions, something like that, instances for use of American armed forces abroad 1798 to 2023. And then if you look through this, here is a list of every military action that the United States has taken, and only something like 5% of this has fallen under an AUMF, right? Meaning Congress has approved of that action. Most of it has been when war was not declared, and even if there was a super broad like blanket of you could do whatever you want as long as you're combating terror in whatever. Most actions do not fall under this. And as you can see, it's quite a bit. So the topic is that, like, this should be stopped. The only way to stop it is like a change in the Constitution, which doesn't fall outside the scope of how this is phrased. It's just a thing that people debating this topic need to understand. Let's take a look at the alternate sort of approaches. Resolve, the president should be required to obtain congressional approval before deploying U.S. military forces abroad. Like, military forces? Okay. Congressional approval should be required before the U.S. Okay, so it's all about, like, okay. I like this topic a lot more than the similar in area topic from 2018. I think it's a lot better phrased. I think the AF talks about response time, and I just think that maybe it would be beneficial to say specifically in the resolution itself that this would be done through a constitutional amendment, because that is, in fact, the only way for this topic to be legal. So you may as well say it rather than force kids to debate it every round. With that having been said, yeah, I think the AF talks about like response time and the need for secrecy. I think the neg talks about precedents of presidents doing bad things with that power. I just think, all in all, people don't realize that the vast majority of U.S. military actions fall under this umbrella. But with that said, I think that probably makes the topic more valuable to use. Yeah, I'm at like an 8. Maybe a 7. Why not an 8? Yeah, I think that topic is pretty solid. I don't love the, like, no, I'm at a 7, and here's why. The only reason I'm not rating this higher than a 7 is because, again, I think most of the potential outcomes are locked behind debaters predicting what a president would or would not want to do with that power. And they can't really do that very effectively. So then the only thing left to discuss is the merits of this policy in a vacuum where there isn't really all that much to say other than, I don't know, response time versus accountability. But still, interesting topic. Let's take a look. I don't know how many pages. What, did I miss something? Nope. Okay, cool. Team, I think we're going to get to that picnic. Okay. Let's take a look at the international topics. These topics primarily focus on issues outside the United States. Scale of 1 to 10. Okay, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, Northern Ireland should... Oh! It's international in that the actors are not the United States. Interesting. Let's see if that's true of all of these. Yeah. Okay. Given significant changes to UK, EU trade policies being announced just this week, I worry that by the time this topic comes up, there will be significant enough changes from the status quo that this topic is what's the word I'm looking for? Outdated or bad to debate in some way. But also, like, can they? Can the UK rejoin the EU? Process. Okay, so just it's legal. They can do that. Yeah, I mean, the EU's in support of it. The UK's... yeah, the main issue is just it's going to be outdated. I don't know. I give it a 6. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, 5 being neutral. It's a 6. Okay. Privatization of outer space exploration produces more benefits than harms. Is this in the abstract or an evaluation of the status quo? Is there private outer space exploration in the status quo? Also, what is outer space exploration? Like, is that a term of art or is that just something they used? Let's see. Because my understanding is that like SpaceX and stuff like that have done like satellites. They've done like low Earth orbit. Like to me, exploration is like we sent a, uh, you know, what's the term I'm looking for? Like the Voyager. We spent a spacecraft out to Pluto to take a picture of it and see what's there, right? Um, I don't like. Da-da-da. I mean, does exploration just mean going into outer space? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so it's private organizations that have planned and announced space exploration. Okay. Working to make space travel more efficient in hopes to reduce. Okay. Cool. Enceladus astrobiology probe. But it's from NASA, but it's privately funded. Oh, breakthrough. Okay. All right. Sure. 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 Uh. Okay. Great. So here is the Wikipedia article and the specific section of it that you need for this topic, which is private sector and space commercialization under the future of space exploration Wikipedia article. There's your entire debate. Um, you know what? I like this topic. Um, my only concern with this topic is whether it's evaluating the future benefits or only the status quo benefits. Um, with that said, I think space is cool, and I think there's great arguments from a variety of impacts relating to a variety of impacts here. I think there's easy research while still being rewarding research for people who want to dig more deeply. I think this is neat. Just make it clearer if we are talking about only evaluating the status quo, or if we are allowed to weigh anticipated harms and benefits down the line. Yeah, this is my favorite topic so far. I would give this a 9. I think space is really cool. So I think in terms of those 5 big impact areas, right? Like space easily has to do with economy. I think like pro-space, pro-private space, whatever, right? Easily has to do with the economy. It you could argue some poverty stuff. It easily has to do with public health. It easily has to do with the environment. It easily has to do with war. All in really interesting ways, right? Like a lot of medical technologies come from space programs because there's medical problems you have to solve in order to be able to travel through space, but also and like this creates the like financial incentive for it, right? If there's a disease that only affects 5,000 people in the United States, we're probably not going to pour a ton of money into resolving it. But if we have some sort of, secondary benefit from one of these technologies in space that we pour all this money into because we need to go up and get all the gold or whatever, then we can use it on Earth to help those 5,000 people. Awesome. There's also like unintended benefits, right? Like, oh, we have this technology that we made to do X, Y, and Z in space because it's like a super precise laser, but now we can use that super precise laser for like laser eye surgery, right? So I think that's tight. I think all of the environmental stuff is really interesting. I think even on the negation side, like how the implications of that on war and environment, and yeah, I think space is really cool. And who doesn't like talking about space? If you don't like it, you're wrong. Yeah, I'm gonna go with 9. Benefits of, and I also like, as far as like, yeah, I like the topic. I don't dislike anything about it, like not being a policy round, because I think making it a policy round makes just the question too much about the status quo. And I think the more this question focuses on the status quo, the worse it will be, because it will inevitably become about, like Elon Musk, rather than the larger question being asked. And what's the other guy's name? Jeffrey Bezos. Okay. The benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area outweigh the harms. I don't know. Seems fine to me, right? I don't know much about this, but I don't see a problem with the phrasing, and I feel like it should be a pretty easy topic to research. Let's see. I mean, what's the ground? I'll explain what I'm doing in just a second. Um, so I don't know how exciting this is to debate. It seems like it's a lot of countries mutually agreeing they want to do this, and then environmental organizations saying that the trade policies don't observe international conservation laws and will create deforestation um, and other biodiversity related issues. It seems fine. I don't know. It seems fine. It's just really broad if you approach it from the standpoint of trying to evaluate the I mean, like, okay, so let's like, oh, that's a huge agreement with a ton of countries. That seems like a lot to research, but like, I don't know, dude. It's a bunch of countries that all kind of agree they want to do this, right? Like, you're just what it's free trade, right? You're just not putting tariffs on each other, and you're just agreeing to do that. I think there's a lot of organizations that are talking about doing that, a lot of international organizations that are talking about doing that in light of Trump stuff. Yeah, and the net ground is like that they would all be teaming together to do something that's not good for the planet at large, or for themselves. In theory, is it a little paternalistic to say that they don't know what to do with their own ground? Well, I mean, we're not talking about stopping them. We're talking about them doing harm. And I don't know. I would argue that claiming that an African Union of countries is somehow exempt from analysis of harm they might do is more paternalistic than just like, I don't know. I don't love the topic, but I don't have major problems with it. I just don't think it'll be anyone's favorite topic of the year. I'm gonna call it a 5. Gonna call it a 5. Okay. The Economic Community of West African States, I'm assuming, yeah, this is a term of art, this is a specific organization, should substantially increase sanctions on the alliance of the Sahel States. Wow. Really specific. This is like an extemp question. The Economic Community of West Africa should increase military engagement in the alliance of the. Okay, so it's about a specific African conflict and whether they should conflict more than they are right now. I don't know, dude. Like, is like I understand wanting us to understand international problems better. My hesitation here is that like you're asking students to learn about an international conflict and like pick a side for the sake of the debate. And yeah, I don't like, based on, it just reads like the kind of debate where a lot of well-intentioned but misinformed children are going to say fucked up things about brown people. That's what this is reading like to me, right? Like, I don't know, let's okay. What's up, Rand? Let's meet my cat, huh? This is Randy. I don't know if I had Randy last time I made a video. She wants some attention. And now that she has it, she doesn't want it anymore. So, Randy, I'm going to be done, and I'm going to give you some treats after this. And from all the children and coaches at home, we thank you for your service. Okay, you ready? Ready to go back? Okay, I'll put you back. I love you. Okay. Yeah, I guess I don't want to take too much time on this one. Look, I think international conflict is important and interesting. I am a little worried that this topic just invites children to label an entire swath of nations as terrorists or some other problematic evaluation of brown people in the global south that a child might not know better than to do. With that said, I guess the sanctions option is better than the military action option, because I think that Neg would just argue that military action is World War III, right? Like, between so many nations, pulls in allies and goes off the brink, and so on. All in all, this topic feels more like an extemp question than a great PF topic. It's really narrow, kind of obscure, and while I can see that inviting students to learn more about an important issue, I think it just runs a greater risk of handing a bunch of people who don't know what they're talking about a microphone to say misinformed things to a larger audience. Okay. How do I feel about it? I don't know. I don't feel great. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with this topic. It just kind of makes me say yikes. Okay. The United States should prohibit the use of lethal autonomous weapons. Didn't we do this, or was that LD? NSDA topics. Again, watch this be like 10 years ago. Past topics, public forum, no, must have been LD. Oh, that's what I was. Oh no, here we go. Autonomous weapons. This was LD, and it was, I guess by that point, what are we doing? 5 to 6, so that'll have been 5 years ago. But the problem is, even though it was a long time ago, all of the briefs exist, right? All of the files still exist, and that just makes it so that people who have access to that have a very easy prep burden, and people who don't have a comparatively very difficult prep burden. I think this was a cool topic when it was done in LD in 20... When was it? Feb. So this was like the Tournament of Champions topic? Yeah. In 2021. But I don't think that reusing it is necessarily a great idea. Unless, I mean, let's look it up. Lincoln Douglas Tournament of Champions 2021. Is this an interview with somebody? This is an interview with somebody. Shout out to Debating for America's Youth. Does this say what the topic was here? No, it doesn't say what the topic was. Okay. Tournament of Champions 2021. The invite. Do you say what the topic is? Let's just see if we can find it on YouTube. TOC LD 2021.
The debate community is a community of such smart and hardworking people, and while I can all agree,
yeah,
reason a minor incident could best response from the autonomous weapons 3 is perception. Autonomous weapons are true.
Yeah, they're doing autonomous weapons. Okay. Yeah. This was the TOC 2021 debate topic, which happened online. And so there are a lot of videos of it happening, of those rounds. I think first, the pre-existence of a lot, that's not how you spell pre-existence, or it's not a word. how about this? Great. Of a lot of files on a topic gives an advantage to teams that have access to those files. Also, this being the topic for LD's most technical tournament probably doesn't bode well for the arguments that will be brought over into PF, because people will look to those rounds to determine what they should say, especially since they're just a YouTube search away. If that makes you think that actually it's a good thing because the research burden is lowered, then by all means go ahead. Like, if that's how you feel about it, then that's cool, right? But my opinion is, like, I'm a little concerned, but like, if that was the topic, I would be like, tight, let's start writing some cases. 6. I certainly wouldn't be like, this resolution has some sort of inherent problem in it, and like, now that who knows what the AF is going to say or what the neg is going to say. I would just start looking through some files and watching rounds and making adjustments to stuff. I don't know what, I don't know. I bet inexperienced people can figure it out. I don't really have a preference between these two's phrasing. Okay. The United States federal government should ratify the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Resolved, the United States should support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Resolved, the United States should reduce its nuclear weapons arsenal. I think nuclear is a neat topic. It's just really hard to talk about these resolutions without just, like, what are you going to say? Like, what is the neg ground, right? The neg ground is readiness, like I don't know, like, you know, like what, like mad, you know, like my concern with this topic is that there just isn't a wide variety of arguments. The AF will argue that nuclear weapons are dangerous and immoral, and that accidents are inevitable, and that the presence of nuclear arsenals incentivizes arms races. The neg will argue that MAD doctrine requires us to have a substantial and effective arsenal in order to be safe. That's kind of all there is to the debate, as far as I can tell. Right? I think nuclear is neat, but yeah, I don't know. That's all I'm kind of seeing there. I think it's fine. France should extend its nuclear deterrence force commitments to all EU and NATO member states. France should extend it to all its allies. Okay, so between the two, I prefer the first because it's more specific to what states we're talking about, and we don't have to argue whether, like, Taiwan is or is not an ally of France. With that said, like, what's gonna happen? Like, is this trying to get around? Like, okay. If this is trying to make, for example, the Ukraines of the world safer from, let's say, the Russias of the world, right? Well, you're talking about NATO member states, which are already protected by, you know, nuclear. Like, they already have nuclear defense treaties, right? Am I wrong about that? Like they have mutual defense, and a bunch of the members of NATO are nuclear powers. UK, France, US, maybe some other ones I'm forgetting. So does France already have nuclear deterrence commitments to NATO? March 12th, looking at this. France should join NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements to strengthen European deterrence. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is in the context of the U.S., like, not helping its allies and also talking about leaving NATO and shit like that. So let's, yeah, U.S. might go as far as withdrawing weapons from NATO countries. Matching you. Is this? His name is Donald Tusk. That's a weird. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, so, like, it's clearly rooted in that article, or just similar things that are being published. And I mean, it's rooted in basically the U.S. isn't going to protect people, and so France should protect itself, and that is going to deter, like, Russia from doing stuff. Now, like, the only, I think my concern with this topic is that the neg must argue that this triggers some sort of world war scenario, right? Like, what's the other neg ground? The AF is France agreeing to do something if we need to, but presumably because it is a making a commitment, it would then be deterring action against EU, NATO members. The neg then needs to argue that some country, probably Russia, would get upset by that and do something, which in a world where the EU is already economically clashing with Russia, I'm not sure what the unique economic and non-war outcomes of that would be. So I guess the neg ground would just be Russia strikes, or just generic proliferation bad because of nuclear miscalculation arguments. All in all, I think nuclear is a neat topic. I like this topic more than the other nuclear one, but it leaves only 3 or 4 neg responses to an AF that is already only like 1 or 2 AF contentions. So it feels like a very narrow debate to me. Put that as a 5. Maybe a 6. Okay. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations should implement a binding maritime dispute resolution framework for the South China Sea. Okay, so I'm assuming China is in this, and so are the U.S. allies in that, and then they agree to come to some sort of solution that doesn't involve the United States being involved. Let's see. Apparently not. What? The Association should adopt a binding code of conduct with China in the... I guess I just don't understand what a binding code of conduct means. Like, the neg just doesn't get to argue that people wouldn't follow it because the word binding is in the resolution. How is this topic different than just saying Israel and Palestine should form a binding solution? Like, do you know what I mean? Right? Like, you're just saying, what if the problem stopped existing? Does the AF get to say what the specific agreement would be? That seems like it would violate the rule about plans in the PF rulebook, in the NSDA handbook. So the AF argues that it would be better if there wasn't tension in the South China Sea, and the neg argues that it would be better if there was. Yeah, I'm gonna give that a 3. What am I missing here, right? I think potentially the argument is that like some sort of agreement would shut out the US and there's backlash, or it would China's slice of the pie would be unfair, which like you just have to outweigh that like any deal's better than like peace is better than war. And then also like how can you say anything about this deal that we've just imagined, right? What happens if we just search up this resolution? Like, I see. There's a specific thing that they are talking about. What's the. Yeah. Well, what's the problem? Yeah, no. This is I don't get it. Maybe somebody wrote this and they're smarter than I am. I'm going to say it's very likely. But you know, I feel like I'm at least representative of the average intelligence of a sophomore debater, and if I can't figure out what the neg is supposed to say here, then I don't think this is a good place to start with a topic. Okay, how are we doing on time? 2 hours. Okay, cool. The Republic of Korea, South Korea, should end its policy of mandatory military conscription. It feels like it's a really narrow topic. It feels like you're going to debate North Korea will attack, North Korea won't attack. Um, and then you talk about the economy of South Korea. I don't know. It just what is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think the debate is about whether North Korea is a threat or not, right? Because that's the only reason, like China, I guess, right? Uh, I think this debate just comes down to whether or not China and North Korea, and I guess maybe Russia, do or do not pose credible threats to South Korea at the moment. Because otherwise, there wouldn't really be a reason to require mandatory military conscription. And I think that's a really That's a difficult question to answer definitively, and it isn't super interesting to research. I'm going to give that a 4. The Republic of Canada should reduce its economic reliance on the United States. They just said they will. More recently than you posted this poll. Like I said somewhere else on some other topic, I think things that are it was the UK. Like I said on the UK EU topic, I think the risk of this becoming totally obsolete by the time it actually gets debated, maybe a year from now, makes it not a great choice. What did I use for the UK one? 6. Sure. Why don't we go with 6? Okay, topic 11. How many topics? 14. Resolve, the East African community should substantially increase its security operations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The United Nations should strengthen a mandate. UNESCO. Not familiar. These the security, like the peacekeeping. What is that? Yeah, that's the peacekeeping. Okay. Okay, send peacekeepers to the Congo. What is the East African Community? Is that a specific organization? East African Community, EAC. Okay, cool. Do you have a military? Plans. Congo. What's the security operations in Congo? Let's just take this resolution and see why they're writing it. Okay, there is fighting in the Congo. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I don't like about this topic is that it's really vague about what these forces would be aiming to do and how. Like, I don't know that I have a lot more to say than that, right? Like, in order to what, right? Like, to just make there not be a problem. Like, peacekeeping forces specifically, like, so the example everybody points to is Rwanda, right? Where the Rwandan genocide was one of the most horrific genocides committed in the last 100 years. And the U.S. peacekeeping forces were there. They just didn't do anything. They're like under specific, you know, uh, constraints about what they could or couldn't do. And there's been a lot of, issues around peacekeeping forces being sent to places because of a lot of concerns about exploitation of the local people, whether that's through sexual assault or just through, like, I don't know, economic exploitation or whatever, right? Resources, stuff like that. All of that gives a lot of, like, solvency deficit problems that the AF has to answer. And then the AF needs to then say okay, let me, I guess, type that out. Like, if I'm the neg, I'm going to say peacekeeping forces are extremely limited in how they can help. Look to Rwandan genocide. And then read some cards indicting peacekeepers for sexual assault and other forms of harm and exploitation. To answer that, the AF needs to say what exactly? That these forces are going to fix a problem? Like, I guess that's not how I want to phrase that. I think all the AF has to respond to that is to say how bad the status quo is and that it's necessary to do something. But given that these sorts of problems have, like, it just becomes, that turns the whole debate into a solvency debate about the efficacy of UN or East African community, and not really into a debate about the desirability of a specific outcome. In other words, I think the neg just says that wouldn't work, and the AF says, yeah, but we have to try because things are really bad. I'm not sure where else this debate goes. I think that would be an okay debate, but not super exciting or interesting. I'm going to give that a 5. Okay. The People's Republic of China should substantially reduce natural resource extraction. Why? Environmental stuff? Ugh. Sorry, my doorbell is ringing. Presumably because somebody's trying to drop off a package. Okay. All right. We're locked in. 2 hours, 10 minutes. Can't stop and start over now. Let's see. Substantially reduce its internal extraction of natural resources. But it won't. Okay. I can't possibly get up to go check that doorbell. But I guess I have to. Okay, I'm going to check. Okay, my cat food has been safely delivered. All right. Yeah, let's. I want these videos to be interesting, but I also don't want to spend 8 hours editing them. So we're just gonna cook through this. Like. Yeah, I don't. Resource extraction is important to China economically, but it hurts its environment. Like, the neg is asking us to argue China hedge good, which, if you are pretending we are China, would make sense. But when we talk about the US, we don't just assume US hedge is good. We make room for people to argue that it isn't, and we measure the desirability of it based on its outcomes. And so I guess I'm just wondering how much of a chance students in the US have arguing that the main economic and military rival of the country their judges live in should wreck the global environment in order to be a more formidable opponent to their judges' country of origin. Like the judges to the country their judges live in. Like, I get the concept, but it's just like you'd have to argue some like real like China good stuff, which like it's gonna be pretty tough in front of an American. Like maybe they are, right? Like, I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying, like, if the topic was China is good, like that would feel a little like not a great topic. And here, what you're asking our economic and military rival to sacrifice its economic and military strengths through, hegemony, through these mineral resources in order to protect the global environment, which also helps us, right? Like, and then also, yeah, like these resources also have benefits to the United States. I guess you could argue that. Like, I guess you could argue that these minerals have benefits to the United States. After they're purchased. I do think that's not that strong an argument, though. Like, how would that work then? The neg says China should do this because it benefits the US? I don't know. I'm just kind of lost here. I guess the issue is just that we're role playing as a direct adversary of the country we're in. I'm going to give that a 4. The Republic of India should eliminate subsidies on its coal production. I'm fine with it. Right? Like, as long as there's literature on this, like, I don't know why that's different than it happening in the US. Maybe because it happens more there, right? But like the inherent clash of economic, of short-term economic gain versus long-term environmental sustainability here isn't significantly different than if we made this topic about the US. Like, I don't think the arguments are going to expand the students' horizons beyond domestic issues very much. They're just going to read cards that have Indian places in the name rather than American places. With that having been said, I don't notice any real issues with this topic. Okay, on balance, the benefits of American bilateral free trade agreement with Argentina outweigh the harms. What? What? Why is one of these topics about the United States, and why is that one topic specifically about Argentina, and it's about our bilateral trade, which is a topic which right now is a topic between the U.S. and everywhere? I'm gonna say this is the worst one. U.S. trade with pretty much all countries is very volatile right now. I also don't understand. I mean, like, is there a specific Argentina thing? Freer trade. This doesn't even exist right now. This doesn't even exist right now. They're just saying if this existed, it would be good. I think we have no idea what any of the status quo will look like by the time this topic is being debated, and that seems like a recipe for problems. I also don't really get why this international topic is about U.S. policy, U.S. foreign policy, but none of the others were, and why, of all countries to talk about, Argentina just sort of seemed to have been pulled out of a hat. Surely there's interesting and important things for us to learn about Argentina. I just feel like the AF is going to be more about free trade is good rather than like Argentina's specific exports. Um, I also just don't understand the scenario that the AF is asking us to imagine. Is it that Trump's tariffs exist for all countries that they currently apply to, except for some reason Argentina? Are we just arguing that if we focus only on Argentina for our scope, free trade would be better than tariffs? Why talk? What would it than just talking about, like, what does it add for us to be talking about Argentina here is my concern, right? Like, if the debate's about Argentina, how does that work in the context of, like, we have a policy just with Argentina? Like, this debate seems to be about US policy toward Argentina more than it seems to be about Argentina itself. Yeah, like, what does it mean? Like, are we imagining that we have tariffs on every country except Argentina, and would that be good? As opposed to having tariffs against every country, including Argentina? Are we saying, look, forget every other country? We're just saying, taking a look at this one, let's use this one example to examine whether tariffs or free trade is better. But then, like, why that example, and why limit it to one example? Why don't we just make the topic tariffs versus free trade, right? Like, why not just make the debate be about tariffs versus free trade? I mean, the reason why you can't make and let the debaters choose which countries they want to use as examples. The reason for that is because you can't use the same topic 3 times by just changing Argentina to, the EU and UK, or, whatever, Africa, Yeah. Anyway, S2 is probably too harsh. I'll put a 3. Okay, submitted. What? Great. Hey, folks. What a time it's been. I grew. You grew in height, in wisdom, in patience. I'll catch you next time. I have lots of stuff that I want to work on. Hopefully this stuff comes out more often. And yeah, take care.